Can I just say, I am so thankful that what is happening right here, that I did not have social media when I was dating. Like, that wasn't a thing that's gonna absolutely date me, but I was married by the time Sal could be in my top 4 friends on MySpace. That was like a given. And other than Tom, Sal was my first friend on Facebook, right? Like, those things didn't exist. In fact, I'm curious, I'll have to go home, and maybe this is a fun question for you to ask your spouse or who you're dating. What would you have said, what would you have tweeted at our first date? Especially if you're my generation, it didn't happen back then, right? Or maybe you need to confess what you did tweet after your first date with the person that you're sitting with right now. My name is Jennifer Mazzola. I'm part of the teaching team here at Northpoint. I'm so excited to be with you, particularly this morning and particularly this series. I love the idea of a church saying, hey, we want your relationships to be so healthy, so vibrant. We're gonna have some honest conversations and give you some practical love handles, some things that you can actually use and employ in your marriage, in your relationships, in your dating, in your future dating, or if you're dating again. Now, a few weeks ago when we sat in a room and we said, let's talk about this series, and they're like, Jen, we want you to share one of the Sundays. I had this goal kind of instantly. I was like, I want to immediately be able to share, because I love when Buck or Jordan or Jeremy just are honest about maybe like a fight they had or a dynamic in their marriage, or Buck might have a story about his beautiful wife Jill and something he did wrong and how they had to work through that, right? So I was like, listen, I got a few weeks. I know we're gonna fight. And so I have something to share, and so I just want you to know, the Lord is so faithful. So I just want to share with you a few of the fights we had over the last few weeks. One, we had an argument about parenting. It's weird. My husband is kind of patient and laid back and maybe has a lot more grace. And I just have this other technique in parenting, which is controlling and expectations that are probably a little ridiculous. So we fight about that. We also fought about our finances, also things we don't see the same way. I'm all about I want to make memories. Let's go here. Let's do this thing. And if we go here and do it, let's do it right. And he's weird. He's like, retirement would be nice. I'm like, well, surely that'll just happen. And then we also, we had a fight about sex. But my young adult son is right there, so I'm going to spare him any details on that. You're welcome, honey. You're welcome. We also had a fight about the groceries, and here's how our grocery fights go. I actually don't enjoy grocery shopping, and he really, I love H-E-B, so don't be angry, but I love it, but I don't need to go there or Costco. I want all the things from there, but I don't want to go. It gives me a lot of stress. And he doesn't mind. He actually enjoys it. But here's the deal. If you got to call me 10 times from the grocery store, I might as well have gone and gotten the groceries myself. Thank you. Amen. No. Right, that is our love handle. Don't call 10 times. When we have learned a system, we review the list before we go. Anyway, we also had an argument about just him getting home on time from work. And that's fine. It's I know you got to work, right? That's cool, retirement and stuff. But also, if you tell me you're leaving work at 5, that gives me an idea of when to have dinner ready or when we're going to leave and go get dinner. But when 5 doesn't mean 5, it's frustrating. And it's 5 meant 6. Cool, you got stuck. That's fine, whatever, so we had a fight about that. We also had an argument the other day about getting the house clean. We have different ideas on what clean actually means. We were getting ready for our community group to come over Wednesday. We were cleaning Tuesday night. And I was like, is that clean over there? He's like, relationships are complicated. If in just a short few weeks I had all those fusses, and just like Buck said last week, relationships are complicated. And there's no way in about 30 minutes can we cover all of the variety of complications that this room has. There's no way, right? And if you haven't encountered any complications in your marriage, what, you think you're lying? It just doesn't happen, right? But what's funny about this is as I've had the opportunity over the years of ministry to work with couples, 98% of what we're talking about in this series is actually applicable across all human relationships. This stuff can apply to work, right? This stuff can help me communicate better with my boss, with my coworkers. This stuff applies to friendships, to parenting, to all sorts of dynamics, to our own relationship with God, to our faith. So when we go through this series, even Buck's question last week about how is it with your soul and that being a starting point. But how is it with your soul when you show up to work? How is it with your soul when you're interacting with your kids? This applies across the board. But now I will be honest, today's topic that was given to me is probably going to feel a little more marriage oriented. So if you're not married yet, please hear this with the lens of this is so, if we can master this love handle, this is so valuable in our relationships. And if you're dating or dating again, just really kind of thinking about what that might look like in your future marriage is really, really valuable. So we're going to get started. I'm going to share a series of words with you, and I'm just going to watch for reaction. So if any of these words just kind of jumps up and you're like, oh, I have an emotion or I have a feeling or a reaction to that word, I think I'll be able to tell. So acquiesce. Anybody? It's a great word, right? It's really pretty. We should bring it back. Defer. Anybody have any energy around the word defer? Okay, release. Let go. Relinquish. Say uncle. Submit. No one reacted. Now listen, here's the deal, guys. When I'm sitting in a room and we're planning this series and we're talking about all the different things that make vibrant relationships, and there's a list a mile long, and we had to kind of narrow it down to a few. And they're like, Jen, you should teach on submission. Okay, that'll be great. We think it'd be awesome to have a woman teach on when Paul tells us to submit. And I'm like, I am so excited about this topic. Yes, sure. And then I left that meeting, literally went right into my Wednesday small group, my Wednesday Bible study here at Northpoint. I was talking about a dynamic in my marriage. We were just talking about conversations that I was having with Sal, possibly some arguments and some tension. And one of the ladies in my small group said, have you ever just thought about just submitting to Sal? And after I threw up a little bit, I kind of reoriented. And I'm sure my face was pure disgust because there's something that happens to us about that particular word. I just want to acknowledge that for many of you, you grew up in a system that, that word was abused. And the way that you hear that word now feels like something negative is going to come on the backside of that. That word is about power and control and dominance, and that brings up something for you. And I kind of want to start there, right? Let's unpack that a little bit because the idea of submitting is actually a love handle. It is actually a tool we can deploy in our relationships. So the concept of submission is actually mentioned over 30 times in the Bible. Most of the time it's mentioned in regard to submitting to God, right? To God's authority, to God's rules, to God's reign in our life. But Paul, thankfully, bless his little Paul heart, gave us a couple of letters in which he uses this word pretty strongly, right? One is in Ephesians. He wrote this letter to the church in Ephesus, and it's Ephesians 5:21, and you're going to hear this word several times. He also wrote a similar chunk of passage in Colossians, and these have become known as what's called the household codes. And the idea is hey, baby church, you've just started. You're a new group. You're a new family, a new community, and we want to give you some love handles. We want to give you some ways in which you can interact with each other, particularly in your households, that will actually be healthy and vibrant for you. So we're going to kind of spend some time in the Ephesians portion of that. And this is probably the passage that if when I said that word submit, something jumped up in you, this is probably where that comes from. And it's funny because I wasn't raised in church. And to be honest, Sal has never used that word in our marriage in relationship to, in context to our relationship. And I still have a reaction to that word. But we want to take an honest look at what Paul's actually telling us to do. So let's start in Ephesians. We're going to start with Paul's words to the women. Ready, ladies? Listening? Yeah. Men are like, I hope so. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. I just want to read that again, because we're going to come back to that for a second. To your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Let's show of hands you've heard this before. Yeah, it doesn't preach well. It's not the most popular passage to preach in, depends on where you grew up, right? But women get just a little under 60 words of instruction from Paul. And I just want to point out, this chunk and this portion of Paul's letter would not have been amazing, right? They'd been at that point we're in a patriarchal society, right? Where men truly, everything flows from the head of the maleship in the household, in the community, right? Everything flows from guys. So this would not have been that remarkable. But let's look at what Paul says when he continues to talk to men. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Just pause here. Guys, if you've ever said to yourself, hey, she's killing me, you're almost there. You are so close, because that's what Paul's saying here. You lay your life down all the way. Jesus died on a cross. So you're all, if we're driving you crazy, we're almost there. Let's keep looking. To make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. We're going to keep going. He keeps talking to guys. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they fed and cared for the body, just as Christ does the church. For we are all members of his body. He keeps going. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother. I want to read that one again for some of you guys. It's a real thing. It's in Genesis too, so I'm not making it up. It's said several times. You should really do this. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother to be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. Over 170 words given to men. Over 170 things that Paul says to impress upon guys that this is a big deal. You are to lay down your life. You are to care for. You are to sacrifice. You are to present. You are responsible for her relationship with God. We get under 60. They get about 170. And historically, please understand this, the audience that would have heard that, women would have heard, wives, submit to your husbands as you do to the Lord. And it would have been like, okay, been doing that for a long time. It's unremarkable. But Paul's words to husbands would have been astounding for them. It would have been a moment. It would have been what? You're telling me that I have to care for her, and that she's not just property. I'm responsible for her well-being. I'm responsible for her soul. I have something going on here. It's not just she belongs to me and does what I say, but even beyond that, even though that's so astounding for the men to hear in that point in time, the words that Paul uses before he talks to women or men are really the heart of this love handle, are really the heart of submission. It's Ephesians 5:21. Submit to one another as to Christ, out of reverence for Christ. It's this concept of mutual submission. It's this idea that we're both supposed to be doing this together. And I know that we get caught up on that next verse when he says, wives, submit to your husbands. And I get it. And that's been abused. But that's actually not where Paul starts. Paul starts right here with our second love handle. Submit to one another. And it's funny when we get like a little, sassy about submission and we're like, yeah, well, I'm not, you can't tell me what to do. We submit all the time. We submit to laws. We submit to taxes. We submit to our employers, our bosses, or maybe our managers. We submit to jury duty. I got called 2 weeks ago. I got the little postcard, but I went in and filled it out and I put occupation clergy and I never got called. It was the weirdest. I was like, what? You don't want me to show up and preach? Like I was prepared. And we see this example of submission in the way that Jesus chose to live. He submits to crowds. He submits to the government of his time, all the way to the cross. Like this idea, we've just kind of built this tension and this drama around this word that I think is such a valuable and beautiful word, but we just kind of get around the baggage that we bring with it. Several months ago, I was on my back porch having a conversation with my friend Elena. She goes here. Many of you probably know her. And we were just sitting and talking, having coffee. We were talking about our marriages and parenting and just life in general. And she was sharing that she was having, Shane works here, so I'm using my words wisely, a disagreement. They were not on the same page about something. There was a little bit of a gap. And she was frustrated in this moment. I've also cleared permission, by the way, to share this story. And she was frustrated in this moment. And she said she felt like she was kind of reacting in that frustration, maybe doing things to kind of pull the conversation more in her direction. And she said she felt like God just kind of whispered in her ear, "Are you on his team? Like, are you actually being on his team in this? And what does it look like for you to get on his team?" And I'll be honest, ever since she said that, I have recognized moment after moment in my own relationships, not just my marriage, even in my work relationships and stuff, but particularly in my relationship with Sal, where I'm not on his team. In my frustration or wanting to do things my way or thinking that I actually have the right answer or the only answer, I forget that we're a team, that it's him and I in this thing. It's him and I together. It is mutual. It is one another. And I struggle to get on his team. It's funny because Elena actually had a mentor early in life that during her bridal shower made her this t-shirt. That's Shane's face in puff paint, if you were wondering. So way before even this conversation about getting on his team, like she's the president of his fan club. Like, I know it's kind of like silly, but this is kind of how we start, right? We usually start relationships like, we're the president of your fan club. We are on the same team. And I know this because this is how Sal and I started. Like when we were dating, I hated and continue to dislike live sporting events, right? Man, you would have never known it when we were dating. I was like I bought the t-shirts. He's a Yankee fan, which means it just requires a lot. And we went, he's also a Giants fan, which is sad. But we went. And we went to the games, and and I cheered, and thankful for the food. But I went and I participated, and he knew I didn't necessarily want to be there. But see, now what I do is I leverage my distaste and say, you can buy better seats if you don't take me, because that's like an additional $20. You can just go down one more row. Like, isn't that one more row valuable? Same thing for him, though. When I was in school and we were dating, or even early in our marriage, he would come to every performance that I ever did. In fact, not just performances, he would come to a practice room. This is literally a practice room in my college. He would sit on the floor for hours while I practiced. Now, he's probably not even here this morning. Oh, he is. Look at him. Look at him. I mean, yeah, where's your t-shirt? That's what I want to know. Even other little silly things I used to shave often. And now it's like, well, do I have to wear shorts? Like, that's really the indicator. Or even think about, if you've been married for a while, you know this is true. Don't even act like it's not true. When you were first married and that person walked by between the shower and the bedroom and all their glory, you stopped in your tracks for a second. Now if they walk by naked, you're like, huh, where are my socks? I can't, you just go on about your daily life. Because what happens is We start on each other's team. And it's not that we have to do all these things. It's not that I have to get up and get ready and like have makeup on before Sal gets up. It's not that. But those little tiny things, I think, eventually, because life is hard. And life will cause gaps, right? And if we're not careful, those gaps get wider and wider and wider. And we forget that we are on each other's team. We just forget it. Because at some point we get a little hurt or we get a little tired or we just start going in two different directions. But marriage in its best form is amazing teamwork. That's what Paul's talking about when he says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. But there's something in this passage, just to kind of zoom in, that makes something a little different. Now, I get asked every now and then, like, why do you think a Christian marriage would be any different from a secular marriage or just a civil union or anything like that? And I will be honest, I'm going to tell you, it's those words. And I know you guys are going to be shocked here in a second. I don't always want to submit to Sal. And honestly, I just can't do it most of the time. But when it's for Christ, there's a different motivation. There's a different accountability. There's also a different energy. There's a different grace. That's what makes it a little different, right? So you've probably seen this illustration before. I know Buck has used it, so I just kind of want to throw it up here because I think it's a great visual. Like the idea would be that if I'm here and them or your spouse or Sal in my case is here, that the more that we both fix our eyes and work towards submitting toward Christ, the closer we get, right? It doesn't work if one of us is going in that direction and they are staying there. There's still a gap. When we decide that neither of us are going to submit, there's a gap between us. There's some distance between us. But the more that we both work toward really laying down our lives and really listening for how God would want us to respond and the words God would want us to use, the closer we also get to each other. I recognize not everybody here is really even on board with this idea, and I get it. I wasn't for a portion of my life for sure. I didn't become a Christian till later. But just consider it. Consider that if there is an authority outside of us that draws us in a healthy direction, would there be value in walking in that direction? The other way this kind of plays out is, I mentioned all those fusses before. Just so you know, son, Dad and I are okay. We fuss often, fight rarely, just so you know. That's a pretty lengthy list, right? But they're quick fusses, they're quick fights. And I think there's actually that triangle is a part of that too. Because when the gap is wide, the drama is big. I'm going to show that. We just want to kind of illustrate for you. Right? My moods swing bigger. The tension feels heavier. The weight feels more. Because I don't have my eyes fixed on anywhere but what I think he's doing wrong. I'm not asking myself, I'm not doing the Buck question that he asked last week, where when he's like, how is it with my soul? I'm just like, you need to get your soul together. And the gap is wide. And then we both decide we're going to inch up a little bit. And we're just going to go kind of halfway. And the gap's still there, but it's a little faster. But I'll be honest, we probably fuss daily. But it is over pretty quickly. Mainly because he's actually really funny and he makes me laugh and then makes me angry and then makes me laugh more and we go through this thing. But when we are both fixed, and our eyes, and we're accountable toward Christ, and we're accountable to God for what we say and what we do, and we're in community, and I've got good friends looking at me saying, hey, have you considered submitting to Sal? That time, that depth, that weight, that gravity, that drama gets smaller, and we're able to quickly return to a healthy position. Our posture changes because our eyes are looking in a different direction and our fingers we're reaching out for something else instead of pointing fingers at each other. Getting on their team, first through the viewpoint of submitting to Christ, is a game changer for our relationships. I do need to point out that there's no kind of submission neutral zone. I would love for there to be. We both have to be working on this. So when I am working, going in a direction toward Christ, and Sal chooses not to, there is still that gap. And that gap closing requires work. I've I've had the privilege of doing several weddings, and I love, it's actually kind of like I have a love-hate relationship with them because they're like one of the most intimidating moments ever because it's like supposed to be a big day and people pay a little bit of money for them. And, but every time I marry someone, I say some of the same things to each couple. And I will tell you this though, like one of these brides, like she right here, I said, hey, can you send me a picture of me at your wedding? And this is what she sent me. Next picture. Yeah, I was like, that's not. I was really going for a more holy, reverent moment than that. But I will tell you, man, I think there should be a business of just wedding receptions, like a place you can go without the wedding. Like, because anybody else love wedding reception, dancing, and having fun, right? It's like the perfect mix between anyway, my point is if you need to start a new business, please see me. I would love to go into partnership about that. At the weddings that I do, one of the things I tell every couple is, essentially I say, this day means nothing. What I say is this day is a moment, but this day doesn't make a marriage. Anyone can have a wedding. Not anyone can have a marriage. Just like anyone, can say, okay, I'm going to have a child, or I'm going to bring a child into this world or into our family, but parenting is a different process, right? Actually being married is a process. And it's work. And this day and those moments and those ceremonies are beautiful. And those rings that you spend so much money on are wonderful, but they are reminders of the commitment that you made to work it out, to figure it out. Because marriages and relationships aren't meant to make you happy. They are meant to refine you. And anybody that's been married for about 10 minutes knows this, right? It's not easy, right? Marriage isn't easy. And here's why it's not easy. It makes so much sense to me, right? So here's what we do when we get married. We take a person that is broken, imperfect, has messed up, will mess up, has had amazing moments, and has infinite value, right? We take this person and all that they are, all the good, the bad, the ugly, all the things that they are. And we say, oh, I'm going to go over here to this person who is broken, imperfect, has messed up, will mess up, has had amazing moments, has infinite value, and we're going to put them together for holy wedlock. I got to emphasize that. Lock. You're not married yet. It's a lock. No wonder it's tough, because you know what? This is me and this is Sal, and we've said, okay, we're in. We're in. I'll bet on you, you bet on me. And we're going to figure this out. And it's not going to be easy, but it is going to refine us, and it is going to grow us, and we are going to come out on the other side so different. And if we do this well, we're going to come out better and stronger. And that's going to trickle down into those other little beings that come into our lives that also refine us and grow us. Because this concept of mutual submission really does work. But we say mutual submission, but it actually starts with you. So it actually begins with you. That's why Buck's question is so important from last week. How is it with your soul? It's not how is it with Sal's soul or how is it with their soul. How is it with your soul? You can only change you. And I know that we know this logically, but can we just let that sink in for a second? You can only change you. You can only work on you. It's crazy. I spent the first 10 years of my marriage trying to fix Sal. I got really close, but we just didn't get all the way there. One of my techniques that I'm proud to share is that every Christmas in his stocking, I put a devotional and a journal and a pen. It was always a manly devotional. And the journal was always leather, black or brown. I mean, and I noticed, 10 years later, I didn't bother to ask him if he was using them. I didn't bother to ask him if he wanted that or how he connected to God spiritually. I just saw, oh, yes, men should have devotionals and journals. And so I bought them. And then as they collected on his shelf and never were opened, eventually I was like, you don't use these? He's like, no. And why didn't you say anything 8 years ago? And he's like, well, actually, I go to work, and when I get to work, in my inbox every morning, there's a devotion in my email called Morning Coffee with God, and that's what I read every day. That's part of my morning routine. I hadn't bothered to ask that. I just was going to dictate how he would spiritually mature. I couldn't change him. The other thing we try to do, and if you're doing this, early, when the boys were really little, when you have littles, it's really tiring. It can be really hard. And so I felt like I was doing a lot of the work. And we were both working full time, and I was in ministry, and he worked in corporate. And I was like, we were arguing a lot about whose turn it was. Have you had that argument before? It's your turn. You get up with them. You change them. You bathe them. And I was a little frustrated about that. So I just made a tally sheet to see, to prove who actually was doing more of the diaper changes and the bottle feedings and the things. It turns out we were pretty equal, but that wasn't the point. That didn't work either. It's not about that, right? That's not teamwork. That's not being a team. Who does what? One of the things I think that's really been transformational in my own thought process, in my own marriage, is to recognize that I am accountable for the kind of wife I am trying to be, but I am not accountable for the kind of husband he chooses to be. He gets to answer for that. Same thing with parenting. I am accountable for the kind of parent I am trying to be. I'm actually not accountable for how my sons turn out. They're going to be fine, actually. Especially that one. He's really great. But, this is the reality. But we operate as if we need to do something to them or they need to get it together without paying attention to, are we on their team? We have to look and start with us, just like Buck talked about last week. So what would be steps to getting on someone's team? Let's just look at a couple. First, do you actually know what kind of player you are? And not like player, like what player you are on the team? I know, I'm being hip with you guys. I'm totally with it. If you're single, this is a great opportunity and a great season of life to actually know yourself. Psalm 139, and we put this in baby nurseries and stuff, and we go to Hobby Lobby and get the thing. And it says, your works are wonderfully, fearfully and wonderfully made. I know that full well. Do you full well know how you are showing up on your team? Do you have people in your life that will look at you and tell you how you're actually coming across? Jeremy, a few weeks ago, said, one of the challenging questions we can ask is, what's it actually like on the other side of me? Anybody brave enough to ask their spouse that after he shared that message? Any spouse brave enough to be honest? Right? Do you know how you're showing up for your team and what you are actually showing up like? And then if you do know, could you decide how you want to show up? And maybe you're showing up great, so you could decide to stick to that. Or could you decide what kind of player you want to show up as in your team? And then can you stick it to it? This is what gets hard. So it's kind of like this idea of you set the bar and then you hold it up. And I think culturally our arms get tired and we're kind of wimpy. So we start here and then we just kind of lower the bar. If we're single or we're dating again, if you set your standard and you're not ready, you're not going to compromise, you know what you want and you know what healthy relationships look like and you're working on knowing yourself full well and you want to be a part of a healthy team. But even if we're married, especially the longer that we've been married, do you set the bar daily for how you're going to show up? Because here's what happens, and it happens every day, and it happens in the big picture too. It's we both step in to give 100%. Sal and I are yeah, we're 100% in. And then he has an 80% day. And he comes home with an 80% attitude. Now, what I do is go, oh, well, you're going to come home with an 80% attitude. I'm coming home with an 80% attitude. And then he goes, well, geez, I've had a long day. And she's giving me 80%. I'm just going to, fine. And we hear and hear and hear, and we keep lowering the bar. And we forget that if he had come home at an 80% for a day or a 60%, had a really bad day at work, had to deal with his team, and it was really dramatic, and he's coming home at 50%. If I can stay here and see that and be on his team, what does that do? It changes the temperature in our house. It changes the temperature in our marriage. When we say, I'm going to stay here and I am going to hold this because this matters. And I know what kind of day you've had, but I'm not going to match you. And we're not going to play this game. I'm going to stay here. Something simple that we've employed in our marriage that I think has made a difference. Maybe after today I'll find out it actually doesn't matter at all. But Sometimes when we're both coming home, we just send a text toward the end of the day that says, here's how I'm coming in. I'm coming in this attitude. Or especially like, when I was little, when the boys were little, I wish I had done this more. Like been like, hey, I've had the kids all day. So when you come home, it's a show. You can insert the other word. It's a mess, but if I gave him the heads up about that and he could come in ready to be a good teammate, wouldn't that have made a difference rather than coming home and I'm like, here, they're all yours. And we don't even, just think about little things you could do, moments where you could say, we're going to set the bar and we're going to keep it high. And then number 3, lastly, is are you listening to your coach? Now, funny, this is actually number 1. But I wanted to end with it because if there's anything you hear me say this morning, anything you leave with thinking about, other than Jen really likes wedding receptions and you should invite her to all of them, it's this idea that when we submit to Christ, like that, when we really submit to the coach, right? Like, I know we're in football season, so let's just go with it. Like this idea that when I have an authority outside of me, outside of us, that is leading and guiding our team, and I'm doing this in community that's helping me figure out how to be the best team that we can be. Author and pastor Andy Stanley says, marriage in its best form is a submission competition. A submission competition. And I actually would love to kind of expand that. Like, what would your work life look like if you had a submission competition? What do your friendships look like? What do your community groups look like? What does your parenting even look like? What could look different if you kind of took on this challenge of, I'm going to have a submission competition. I'm going to work to submit to Christ, and through that, see how I can lay down my life. That's kind of the point of all of this, right? That's why we come together every Sunday. That's where it started. If I can lay down my life for this other person, if I can submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now I'm going to do these words again, okay? And I'm hoping they just feel a little different. We'll start with the pretty one: acquiesce, defer, release, let go, relinquish, say uncle, or submit. When you submit to one another, your relationships will be healthier. When you submit to one another, your relationships will be healthier. And so the question for us this week, Buck left us with a great question last week. How is it with your soul? And so the question this week is, are you on their team? Or maybe you have just forgotten because life gets hard. And maybe your question might be like, how can I get back on our team? What does it take to be on their team? Or maybe it's a conversation you have with each other. How am I showing up for you? How am I showing up for our team? How can we get back to being a team? I'm going to pray for us. Father, I thank you that you have designed us to be in teamwork. But Lord, I confess that teamwork is tough. Our own personalities show up, so we got to start there. But God, then you encourage us to be in relationship with these other imperfect people, all for the purpose of refining us. So wherever we need to mature and grow in our own team dynamic, that you would just open our eyes to that. In any way we need to prepare or practice or get ready to be a part of a team, that you would open our eyes and our hearts to that as well. We thank you that you design marriage, you design relationship to be a space that we grow and are refined. But we need you in that. We can't do it on our own. We don't love well on our own. So we look to you first to show us how to respond to these next questions, these next few weeks. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys.